Story 1. The Girl's Ad for a Roommate. This story is well known in my family and among my friends. Amanda, my brother's girlfriend at the time, was looking for her first apartment and preparing to move out of her parents' house. She and my brother had only been dating for a few months, so they decided not to live together just yet. Instead, Amanda started looking for a roommate online using Craigslist. She came across an ad titled something like, "Looking for a female roommate." This kind of ad was pretty common in the area, which was mostly filled with young professionals. The ad described a room in a house for just $225 a month, an absolute steal compared to other listings. The advertiser introduced herself as a 23-year-old college student who wasn't comfortable sharing the house with men. The setup included a private bedroom and an attached bathroom. It seemed perfect. The only odd thing was that the ad only included one picture of the house's exterior. Amanda emailed the advertiser expressing interest and asking to meet in person and tour the place. Within 30 minutes, she received a reply with the details and an invitation to visit at 8 p.m. The roommate mentioned that she worked late, so that was the only time she'd be available. When Amanda arrived, she found a handwritten note taped to the front door. "Door broken. Use back door." Walking around the house, she noticed it looked okay, though a bit neglected. The grass was overgrown, the windows were dusty, and weeds were sprouting everywhere. Still, nothing seemed too concerning. She knocked on the back door and an older man answered. At first, Amanda thought she had the wrong house, but the man reassured her, saying he was the landlord. He explained that the roommate was working late and had asked him to show Amanda around. He seemed polite and offered to give her a tour. Amanda's instincts started buzzing, but she decided to go along with it. The man appeared to be in his 40s, unshaven, and dressed like someone who might be living out of his car. Only the kitchen light was on, and as they walked through the house, Amanda noticed something that set off alarms. The house was completely unfurnished. There were no couches, no tables, nothing. Amanda asked a few questions, which the man answered politely but with a slight impatience, as if he wanted to hurry through the tour. When they reached a specific room, the man refused to open the door, saying it was the roommate's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they continued, Amanda's unease grew. She noticed that the front door had a wooden plank nailed across it. This was the broken door. At this point, she decided it was time to leave. She thanked the man for showing her the house, but before she could step outside, he insisted she check out the basement. "I just finished renovating it," he said with a strange smile. "It would make a great rec room." They were standing in a narrow hallway between the living room and the back kitchen. The man opened the basement door, which swung outward, blocking Amanda's path to the back door. The basement was pitch dark. He smiled again, gestured for her to go down, and said, "Ladies first." What happened next was pure luck. Amanda's phone vibrated with a text just as a car pulled up outside the house. Thinking quickly, Amanda pretended to take a call. "Oh, hey, you're here already. I'll meet you out back," she said loudly with confidence. She apologized to the man, brushed past him, and stepped outside through the back door. He stood there watching her with a puzzled expression. As soon as she was outside, Amanda ran to her car and sped away. When she got home, she told everything to her mom and my brother. They immediately called the police. The Craigslist ad had been taken down by the time officers arrived at the house, but what they discovered was deeply unsettling. The house had been foreclosed 6 months earlier and was abandoned. The room the landlord refused to open was where he had been living. Inside, they found piles of dirty blankets, rotting food, and empty water jugs. The walls were covered with torn pages from adult magazines. But the most horrifying discovery was in the basement. The man had strung a thin fishing line at ankle height across the stairs, a clear tripwire. The basement was empty except for a pile of old blankets, a broomstick wrapped in leather straps, and a small box containing various rolls of duct tape. To this day, Amanda shudders when she thinks about what might have happened if she'd gone down those stairs. Story 2. The Cheap House on Craigslist. I think everyone's heard a Craigslist horror story, but no one ever expects to end up in one themselves. I've been thinking about leaving the city life behind for a while. I guess I just couldn't take the constant hustle anymore and craved something quieter, more remote. Over the years, I'd managed to save up a decent amount of money and decided it was time to buy a house. But when I started looking at prices, my jaw nearly hit the floor. I knew houses were expensive, but I hadn't realized just how expensive. In desperation, I opened Craigslist. I didn't expect to find anything there, but that's exactly what happened. The listing was as simple as it could get. Small house for sale, well below market value. I clicked on it immediately. When I saw the price, I was convinced it was a mistake. There was no way someone was selling a house that cheap. The place looked decent in the photos. Eventually, I found the seller's number and gave him a call. Honestly, I was expecting the price to be a typo or worse, some kind of scam. Instead, I found myself talking to a man named Wilbert Johnson. When he told me the house was still available, the first thing I asked was about the price. The old man assured me it wasn't a mistake. It was an old house, he explained, out in the middle of nowhere, and he wanted to sell it quickly. But there was one catch. He only wanted cash. Said he didn't trust banks or real estate agents. He mentioned that a few others had shown interest before me, but they'd all backed out when he explained this condition. To me, it didn't seem like a big deal. If anything, it would make things faster. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. Long story short, a week later, on a Saturday morning, I was driving 3 hours to meet Wilbert at what I hoped would soon be my new home. When I arrived, the old man greeted me with a bright smile. He was a sturdy guy, maybe in his 50s as far as I could tell. "You must be Mark," he said, reaching out to shake my hand. I nodded. "Yes, sir." "Well, this is it," he said, stepping aside to give me a better view of the little house. I took a moment to look around before stepping inside. As soon as I set foot inside, the old wooden floors greeted me with a loud creak. The moment it happened, I noticed a flicker of unease flash across the man's face. "I guess you were right," I said with a laugh. "The place is old, but it's got character." Hearing that, the relief washed over him and the smile returned to his face. "Oh, it definitely does. I've lived here for over 30 years. So why sell it so cheap?" The old man fell silent for a moment. His eyes drifted to the side before he let out a long sigh. "I'll be honest, it's because of Lisa's disappearance." "Lisa?" Another sigh. "My wife, Elizabeth. It's been almost 2 months since she vanished. She walked out that door over there and never came back. No one's seen her, no one's heard anything, just gone, like that, without a trace." "Wow, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "It's nothing to do with you," he cut me off, his voice sharp. "I did everything I could, talked to the neighbors, called the cops. They searched half the damn county but found nothing. I kept looking. But now..." His voice cracked and he shook his head. "I can't live here anymore. Everything reminds me of her. That painting over there? She made it 20 years ago. See this tablecloth? She bought it at a flea market a few years back. Isn't it beautiful, Wilbert?" she said. "I've been stuck with this ugly thing ever since. Every time I look at it, I can't stop thinking about where she went and what might have happened. It's just too much," he finished, his voice trailing off into a whisper. I stood there, shifting uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. I've never been good at handling situations like this, human interactions, I mean. After a few awkward moments, I opened my mouth to say something, but then I heard a sound. It was faint, like scratching. In an instant, old Wilbert walked over to an ancient radio and turned it on. I stared at him as the music drowned out the sound. "Sir, what are you doing?" When he caught my look, he seemed embarrassed and turned the radio off again. "Well, that's another reason the price is so low. And what's causing that? Ghosts." I blinked at him, trying to read his expression, but his face stayed serious. I opened my mouth to ask what the hell he meant by that, but then he burst into laughter. "Oh, hell, I'm just messing with you. It's rodents. We've had trouble with those damn pests for a good 5 years now. I've got no clue how they get in, but they're stubborn as hell. They burrow through the ground outside and somehow end up in the walls. Never could figure it out. Could be a cat stuck in there too. I've heard that happen sometimes. They chase the rats and end up getting stuck themselves. I shrugged. Well, I was planning on fixing the place up anyway. I remember you mentioned that. I've got a ton of stuff piled up. I was going to clean it out, but with Lisa's disappearance and all, I never had the time. With that, he led me to the garage and showed me a collection of tools and supplies. You know what? I'll throw all this in with the house, for free. God knows I can't take it with me, and I sure as hell won't need it anymore. Consider it my way of apologizing for not mentioning the rodents earlier. I thanked the old man profusely. Looking at all the stuff, I figured it was worth at least $500, maybe more. We talked some more as he showed me around the house. Every now and then he'd stop to point out a project he'd been meaning to tackle and gave me detailed advice. Start with the upstairs, use this or that material, do this in that way, and so on. It all sounded like solid advice, and it was clear the old man knew what he was talking about. When the tour was over, we shook hands to seal the deal, and I agreed to come back in a few days to finalize everything. Wilbert, in turn, said he'd write up a list of all his renovation tips. When I returned with the cash, he let out another long sigh. I think there's one last thing I should tell you. This place, well, it has a bit of a story. I looked up at him. First rodents and now, what? It's probably all nonsense, he started, shaking his head, but Lisa always talked about it. She said that back in the day, when people still kept slaves, there was a lynching here. I never put much stock in those old tales, but this time, I couldn't hold back a laugh. Was he pulling my leg again? You know what? I never believed any of it either, but Lisa swore she'd hear wailing and crying in the middle of the night. To be honest, I think it's just those damn teenagers down by the creek. What teenagers? There's an old cabin near the creek not far from here, Wilbert said. Some local kids. Usually teenagers go there to drink and cause all kinds of trouble at night. Well, that doesn't sound like anything I can't handle. A few minutes later, we sealed the deal. The old man handed me his notes and said he'd written his phone number down in case I had any questions about the renovations. When he left, I stood there staring at what would soon be my new home. What an interesting place, I thought. Sure, it was going to need a lot of work, but no way could I find a property this cheap anywhere else. For the first few nights, I didn't even sleep there. The old man's furniture was still in the house, and to feel comfortable, I needed to get rid of all of it first. To be honest, it felt strange, clearing out someone else's life and memories like that, wasn't she? But the worst part? The damn scratching noise. It kept happening, over and over. Sometimes it was soft, other times frantic. Maybe there really was a cat stuck somewhere. The thought gave me chills. I like cats, and the idea of one suffocating inside the walls made my stomach turn. The next day, my friend Mike showed up. I told him about the house I was buying, and he said he'd be happy to help with the renovations. Truthfully, I think he just wanted an excuse to get away from his wife and kids for a while. Doing some hands-on work and cracking open a few cold beers with an old friend. That sounded like a good time to him. This is a nice place. You really got it for that price? Yep. They say it's haunted, and there are rats in the walls, maybe even cats. Mike gave me a weird look. Come inside, I'll tell you everything over a couple of beers. We sat down on the kitchen floor, the one I'd eventually replace, and I told him all about old Wilbert and the stories he'd shared. As if on cue, the frantic scratching started up again. Mike paused, listening intently. That doesn't sound like rats to me. Maybe it's some other animal. We should probably get some traps or call an exterminator. I thought about it, but shook my head. If we call an exterminator, they'll fill the place with chemicals or something. I'd rather just start the renovations and see what we find. Mike shrugged. Fine, but don't blame me if we uncover a giant rat colony in one of these walls. We got to work after finishing another beer. There was a lot to do. The floorboards were old and rotten in several places. The wallpaper was stained and hideous, and I decided a few partition walls had to go. We had a busy few days ahead, maybe even a week. It didn't take long for us to adopt Wilbert's trick of turning on the radio to drown out the scratching noises. They weren't as loud anymore, but they were still unnerving. By the end of the first day, we'd made decent progress. Mike initially wanted to book a hotel room in the next town, but after some convincing, he agreed to stay. We spent the evenings reminiscing about high school and college, and Mike often talked about his wife and kids. Even though he said he was happy to have some time away, I could tell he missed them. On the third night, he woke me up in the middle of the night. "Hey man, are you hearing this?" he whispered, his voice cautious. As I listened, I noticed the scratching again, but there was something else. A faint sound. It almost sounded like someone crying or wailing. I thought about Wilbert's story of the lynching and what his wife had heard, but I shook my head, reminding myself of what he'd said about the local teenagers. Probably just some drunk kids messing around. Wilbert told me they hang out near the creek. Maybe they think it's funny to spook the new guy. Mike nodded, but he still seemed uneasy. "Yeah, you're probably right. Want to go outside and give them a scare?" I laughed and shook my head. No way was I going out in the middle of the night chasing after teenagers. Besides, I didn't want to be known as the crazy guy in the neighborhood. Eventually, we both went back to bed, though my mind couldn't let go of the story. The scratching, the wailing. Something about it didn't sit right. The next day, I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the renovations again. That was probably my second mistake. We doubled down on the work. I was trying to find some trace of those pesky rodents, and Mike was probably just trying to finish up so he could leave. He'd always been a bit superstitious. On the fourth night, the wailing started again. Mike told me he'd head to a hotel if it continued. I argued it was just the teenagers again, but this time, he wasn't buying it. "So, you're telling me there's a group of kids with nothing better to do in the middle of the night, 2 nights in a row?" "I don't know, man. Maybe it's a cat stuck somewhere. But I'm not about to believe in ghosts," Mike grumbled, but didn't say anything else. For a moment, I thought about going outside to investigate, but I decided against it and eventually drifted off to sleep. By the 5th day of renovations, we were making real progress. The upstairs was nearly done, the old partition walls were gone, and the wallpaper was stripped. Following Wilbert's instructions had worked surprisingly well. That was probably my third mistake. That night, Mike and I stayed up late, watching old movies on my beat-up laptop and sharing a bottle of whiskey. For the first time, there were no sounds, no scratching, no wailing, nothing. "Told you, there's no ghosts," I said, my words slightly slurred. Yeah, whatever," Mike said with a laugh. The next day, we tackled the old floorboards, which turned out to be harder than I expected, especially with a hangover. Still, we made decent progress. By noon, we'd finished half the house. "Looks like those rats are finally gone, huh?" "Guess so. Honestly, part of me expected to find them under these old floorboards. Hopefully they stay gone." We were joking and laughing until we found the basement. While ripping up the floorboards in the old storage room, we uncovered an ancient hatch. After a moment of shock, we pried it open, revealing a staircase. "Man, what the hell is this?" "The basement, I guess," I said, trying to sound confident. "Yeah, no kidding. But why the hell is it hidden like this?" None of it made sense. Who knows? Maybe he just didn't use it. Maybe it was infested, so he sealed it up. Or maybe it's a serial killer's secret dungeon. "Not funny," I muttered. All right. So, you want to go down there and check it out?" As I stared down at the dark staircase leading to who knows where, a wave of unease washed over me. Suddenly, I wasn't so confident in my words. Finally, I nodded. We each grabbed a flashlight and began to descend. There was no light down there, and for a brief moment, part of me half expected the old hatch to slam shut, with none other than Wilbert himself on the other side. "Man, this is creepy," I muttered. "Can you stop? I'm not exactly enjoying this either." When we finally reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, damp room. It was completely empty. "It's small, isn't it?" "Definitely," I replied. "The entire basement wasn't any bigger than one of the bedrooms upstairs. Wasn't a basement supposed to be the same size as the house above it?" "At least there aren't any rats," I joked. "Yeah, but this wall here, it's weird." "What do you mean?" "Look," he said, pointing. See all the moss and grime on the other walls? But this one, it's different. It almost looks new. Now that he'd mentioned it, I noticed it too. Sure, the wall was damp like the rest of the basement, but it didn't have the same moss or stains. I watched as Mike reached out and knocked on the wall. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Shh," he hushed me. He walked over to another wall, knocked there, then came back and knocked again on the odd wall. "It sounds hollow." We exchanged a glance. "You think that's where the rodents came from?" A minute later, we were back with tools, starting to break through the wall. After a few solid strikes, the first bricks crumbled inward. Instinctively, I stepped back, bracing myself for a swarm of rats or mice to come pouring out. But nothing happened. We leaned closer, peering through the hole we'd made, and that's when we saw it, a second section of the basement. Mike was already shining his flashlight through the gap. At first, we didn't see anything, but then we noticed something on the floor. No, not something. "There's someone in there," I whispered. We worked faster, pulling down more bricks until we had a gap big enough to step through. Inside there was a person, a woman. She had long gray hair, wore a filthy nightgown, and lay crumpled on the floor. Her face was frozen in a permanent mask of terror, and there was no doubt she was dead. Then I saw the long, bloody scratch marks etched into the walls, and suddenly everything clicked. A moment later, I was upstairs, dialing the police and stammering out what we'd found. They didn't need to tell me the woman's name. The moment I understood what had happened, I already knew who she was. It was Elizabeth Johnson, the wife of old Wilbert. Story 3, the obsessive roommate. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I found a room for rent on Craigslist, a 2-bedroom apartment that was really nice. The rent was cheap and it was close to campus, so it seemed like the perfect spot. The girl who lived there was 29 years old and named Beth. She was tall and stocky with jet black hair and super pale makeup. She seemed nice, though a little quiet, but she liked me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. On the first night, we went out for pizza, and that's when I started to notice something was a little off about her. Over dinner, she kept saying how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know how to respond, so I just shrugged and said, "Thanks." I mean, I don't look anything like Shia LaBeouf, so it didn't make sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I'd seen her room yet. I said no, so she took me to see it. The walls were covered in Shia LaBeouf posters. She even had printed photos of him taped to her mirror. She owned every single one of his movies. I didn't know what to think. It was unsettling. She'd been telling me all night how much I looked like him, and now it was clear she was obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I barely saw her. We didn't hang out or anything. She'd come home from work and practically run to her room, spending the entire night in there. She had this weird, high-pitched giggle that I could hear through the walls at night. I kept wondering what the hell she was doing in there. Every now and then, she'd come out for 2 minutes to talk. She always slurred her words, so I figured she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything at all, just stand in the hallway staring at me while I was in the living room. I'd turn around, see her there, and jump a little. "Hey, Beth." Then there'd be this long, awkward pause, and she'd do that weird giggle again. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me chills. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door unlocking. I stepped out of my room, and all the lights were off, but I could see Beth standing at the door. Her face was pressed against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth repeatedly. Each time she turned the lock, she murmured my name. "Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker." Seeing her standing there in the dark, whispering my name, freaked me out. And it didn't help that she looked like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. Another night, I was watching Gladiator when she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. Then she asked if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was such an abrupt topic change, but I just said, "Sure," and awkwardly sat there while she started talking. 10 minutes into her story, Beth completely lost it. She started yelling at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried the neighbors would call the cops, and she wouldn't listen when I asked her to lower her voice. Then, in the middle of all the screaming, she shouted something that terrified me. "I'm gonna slice his throat wide open!" That changed everything. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger to me, and everything I'd seen so far was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she thanked me for listening and did that creepy giggle again. I got out of there as fast as I could and went to my room trying to sleep. I felt uneasy being in the house with her, and the worst part, there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser against the door as a makeshift barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the dresser sliding across the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on the light and yelled at her to stop. I could see her through the crack in the door. She was completely drunk, with this crazed look in her eyes. I shoved the door shut and screamed at her to go back to her room. I heard her footsteps retreat, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, when I walked into the hallway, my heart nearly stopped. One of her kitchen knives was on the floor right by my door. Chills ran down my spine. All I could think about was her screaming about slitting that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she claimed she didn't remember trying to open my door. She didn't even remember talking about her ex. That was the last straw. My lease was month to month, so I found another place and moved out. About a month after I left, she contacted me. I was at the movies, so my phone was off. When I turned it back on, I was shocked to find over 40 text messages from her sent within 2 hours. They were completely insane, ranging from "Hey, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." I didn't reply and never heard from her again. To this day, I wonder, if I hadn't pushed the dresser in front of the door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? That thought still haunts me. Story 4, The Craigslist Amputator. I first heard about Craigslist in the aftermath of the attacks in 2001 because a lot of information and photos were being posted there. The pictures and videos people were uploading were just insane. And the first-hand eyewitness accounts being posted on Craigslist NYC were even crazier. Like, some people said they saw a man in a business suit run past them with his tie on fire, but he didn't seem to notice. Another described the people emerging from the dust as like statues coming to life. That's what got me into the habit of logging on every day, and when I ran out of new pictures to stare at or accounts to read, I'd inevitably end up switching back to the Craigslist page of my hometown, browsing the local listings. I became a regular visitor to the free section or the for sale listings because you could find some real gems there. Then there were the fix it and frugal posts, which were helpful, and the discussion section could be useful too. But the section I visited daily without fail was the temporary jobs listings. There used to be some really easy ways to make money. You could get paid for taking part in studies or surveys about everything from binge eating to depression. One time, some big beauty company paid me to rub moisturizer all over my face and give them my thoughts about it. There were also small home repair jobs, which were a quick way to make $30. Some folks just needed a ladder to change the battery on their smoke alarm and would pay you $10 in gas money. But then, you'd get the weirder job posts. I remember seeing one that said, "Earn $100 by sending a text." The post claimed it was legit and provided an email address. I was convinced it was a scam, but couldn't figure out how. Out of curiosity, I emailed a short but polite inquiry. I got a response quickly explaining it was legitimate and I'd be paid upon the text's delivery. Still unconvinced, I humored the guy and asked what he wanted me to say. He sent the cell number and the exact wording, just 3 words, "I see you." I chose not to reply. I deleted the email thread, flagged the post, and moved on, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't freak me out. The post disappeared shortly after, maybe flagged too many times or completed successfully. I'll never know. Years later, between 2004 and 2009, Craigslist's popularity surged, and so did the weird posts. Many were jokes or elaborate pranks, but occasionally you'd stumble upon something that felt real. That's when I saw the post. Earn money by helping with medical treatment. Nothing about the title raised any red flags. Curious, I clicked and read the listing and laughed at what I saw. The medical treatment referred to was the amputation of the poster's right leg. The person wanted someone to come to their apartment and assist in cutting off their leg below the knee while ensuring they didn't bleed out. Experience wasn't necessary. They'd provide instructions on tying a tourniquet and cauterizing the wound. Payment? A cool $1,000. At first, I thought it had to be satire. The writing style was self-aware, even funny. The email attached to the post read, "Cash to cut off my leg" at a .com. I laughed so hard I decided to send an email complimenting their sense of humor. To my surprise, they replied. The person whom I'll call Cash said, "They appreciated my note, but were only looking for serious inquiries." Cash insisted the post wasn't a joke. They explained they'd been planning this for years and had even practiced by amputating one of their own fingers. Over the following weeks, we exchanged emails. Cash revealed an unsettling backstory. Their obsession began in childhood after seeing a local teenager lose his leg in an accident. Instead of feeling pity, Cash felt envy, jealous of the sympathy and attention the boy received. This evolved into a fixation on limb loss, particularly legs. Then came the proof. Cash sent a photo of their hand showing the pinky missing, along with a time-stamped note. Later, they sent a grainy video of them using bolt cutters to remove the finger. It was gruesome and undeniable proof. Cash also described helping others with amputations, sometimes as moral support, other times as an active participant. One story involved keeping a man's leg submerged in ice for 20 hours until the hospital was forced to amputate it. Despite their fixation, Cash seemed oddly well adjusted. They had a steady job, volunteered, and were close to their family. When Cash finally found someone willing to help with their leg, they emailed me simply writing, "Today's the day. I'll let you know how it goes." That was the last I ever heard from them. I waited for updates that never came. I sent emails, desperate for any response, but nothing. To this day, I don't know if Cash survived, if the procedure went wrong, or if they regretted their decision too late. The not knowing haunts me more than anything else. Story 5. Missing puppy and possible danger. Almost 20 years ago, I was about 6 months into living with my first serious boyfriend when I suggested we adopt a puppy. I'd always wanted a dog, and I thought it'd be a good test to see how ready my boyfriend was for parenthood. So we went to the pound and fell in love with Oscar, a tiny Jack Russell puppy. From the moment we brought him home, Oscar was pure energy and mischief. His bright eyes, perky ears, and playful personality filled our days with love and laughter, but Oscar had one big flaw. He despised the rats and mice that lived near the dumpsters behind our apartment building. Jack Russells were bred to hunt vermin, and Oscar's instincts were sharp. Every time we took him outside, he'd bark like crazy, his nose glued to the ground, hunting for a scent. Then one day, he actually saw a rat. It was chaos. He went wild, chasing it so fiercely he almost jumped the fence. That's when we decided it wasn't safe to take him near the dumpsters anymore. If he got over the fence, there was nothing between him and the highway. Then the unthinkable happened. One morning, we woke up and Oscar was gone. My boyfriend, drunk the night before, had failed to close the back door properly. Sometime during the night, Oscar had escaped. Maybe chasing a rat, maybe finding a gap in the fence, or maybe someone had stolen him. I was devastated and furious.